In this video, we're going to be replacing a rear wheel hub bearing on this 2015 Hyundai Sonata. To remove the rear wheel, it's going to be a 21 millimeter. Take the lug nuts off now. So now on the back of our caliper, we're going to take out our two 14 millimeter bolts, one on the top, one on the bottom. Because of the location of the brake hose here, we're going to use a shallow socket. Just be careful of that brake line. A wrench is also an option here. So we're going to leave this bolt in just a little bit while we loosen and take out the top. So your two bolts. So now we have our two caliper bolts out. What we're going to do is pull our caliper off of our brake pads. Sometimes you can work it back and forth like this, right up and off. Sometimes you need to get into the bottom with the small pry bar and work that caliper off. Now that our caliper is free, we're going to move the caliper out of the way without putting any undue stress on this line, which could potentially mean putting it on a hanger here, up out of the way, or taking the caliper and sitting it up front in front of your shock on the suspension here. That's what we're going to do, so we'll remove our hanger. Now with our caliper out of the way, we can remove our brake pads. Sometimes you can get in here with the thumb and push them out of the way and push them off the rotor. Sometimes you can use a flathead or a small pry bar. Just give them a push out of the way. We'll do the same on the front. All right, so we never really recommend prying in from the pad side unless you are replacing your brake pads. So what's happened here, these have rusted and corroded right to the hardware. So that was our only option, to pry these guys out. Now our caliper bracket is held in by two bolts, top and bottom. Those are going to be 14 millimeter. Take those out now. And the top one, if you can get your socket in there, go ahead. If not, you might need a shallow socket. So we switched over to a shallow socket here because the more this bolt comes out, the more it was locking our ratchet against the shock. So just keep that in mind. At this point, remember to catch your washer at the same time you pull out your bolt. Don't lose that washer. Now we can remove our caliper bracket. Set that aside. Now at this point, we're down to our rotor. You can see the wheel spins pretty easy. The reason we mention that is now we have 2 Phillips screws to remove. Typically these screws are stuck in there really well. Ours are actually somewhat loose, but what would happen is at this point you try to undo these and the wheel's going to spin. So what you can do here is one of 2 things. You can either go in the vehicle and apply the e-brake. That should lock up your hub and your wheel. Or in our case, we're on a lift. We don't have access to the e-brake. We're just going to put a pry bar to the bottom of the vehicle. Rotate the hub until it locks and take out our screws. Now again, like I said, ours are loose already, but this is what you would do if you were fighting these to take them out. Now that you have your 2 Phillips screws out, your rotor should come forward. If you've had to apply your e-brake to stop this from spinning, you'll want to go in the vehicle now and release your e-brake, because what that's doing is putting outward pressure on the inside of this surface here, so you will not be able to easily remove your rotor. Now, your rotor should come straight off. Sometimes it needs a little help to loosen it up, to slide forward. Okay, in this case, it's not loose at all. So what we're going to do is come in behind here where our caliper sat and our brake pads, hit it with a mallet, and keep rotating it, doing the same thing until it comes free. If you're going to spin it, just watch your fingers here. You can get them caught pretty easily. There we go. So now on the back of our hub we have 4 bolts and a speed sensor wire. The speed sensor is plugged into the back of our hub, so we're going to need to remove that electrical connector now. We're going to use a hook tool to remove this metal lock. Now from there we should be able to just pull our plug straight up and off. Don't lose that metal retaining ring. We're going to need that to lock it onto our new hub. So now we can take that sensor wire, move that well out of our way, and remove these 4 bolts. These 4 bolts are going to be 14 millimeter. Now on the 2 rear bolts that we're doing right now, just be cautious of removing these bolts all the way and getting your ratchet stuck against the shock. So we're only removing ours about halfway so we can remove our ratchet. Now, the bottom bolt is out. The top bolt is almost out. At this point, we can notice the entire assembly, including the parking brake and backing plate, is coming free. So what we're going to do at this point is strap our backing plate and emergency brake or parking brake into position, because when we start to remove these two other bolts here, we don't want this entire thing to fall out. So what we'll do is we'll get this bolt all the way out. To make this process a little bit easier, what we're going to do is just remove our parking brake and hub assembly as one unit instead of bungee cording it and fighting it to remove the hub. So you can do either or. So what we're going to do is remove our parking brake cable held in by this retaining bracket here. Just using a small little pry bar to work that clip up. And now a panel tool to get it the rest of the way. All right, so that's the clip. Now what we can do is lift our brake hose, or our brake line rather, out of that metal bracket. So if you follow this line forward, it's going to be a mounting point for your parking brake cable, which that mounting point pulls your shoes open and closed. Once you find that mounting point, push it to the front of the vehicle. Pull your line backwards and up and out of this bracket. Once you've done that, go ahead and release. Now the very last step to removing this will be to pull everything forward and off of the hook in the front or the rear of the vehicle. If you can't get that done now, we'll do it once we get our last two bolts out. We're just going to use a panel tool to push the hook forward and pull our cable off. And we can set that aside. So now we can finish off removing our first two bolts completely. At this point, just remember, these two bolts are the only thing holding in your hub and your parking brake assembly, so do not let it fall on your feet or fall at all. All right, so our hub is now free. What we're going to do is leave our ratchet right there and just remove our hub. Now that we have our hub assembly and parking brake assembly out of the vehicle, if we flip it over, this is what we have. The back of our hub and the rest of the assembly. Our hub is pressed into this assembly, basically just by the use of these 4 bolts, and over time it's been pressed and stuck in place. So you're going to have to push your hub out of this assembly. So what we're going to try is to suspend the hub to a point where it can move freely down, but the parking brake assembly and shoes are stuck. Now we're ready to try and push our hub downwards. So here's our new one. And what we're looking at basically is this right here. So this area here is what we're trying to free up and push down. All right, so let's try that now. Cardboard box probably isn't going to do much. If you have a couple of 2x4s or a piece of wood or a block or something you can put under there, it's probably going to work better than a cardboard box. This is just here to represent the process. So with a rubber mallet, pop that hub straight out. Try one more time, should drop free. But now you see our hub is coming free. All right, so continue along that process. Get your hub out, and then we'll clean that area. So now that we have our old hub bearing unit out, you can see in here, this corrosion and this rust is what was holding it up and binding it up. So before we install our new bearing, we're going to clean up this lip in here all the way around. Make sure it's ready to receive the new bearing. So now before we install our new hub into place, you can see this is going to go right in here. We have a lot of dirt and corrosion in there that we're going to need to clean up first. So we're going to use a wire brush, do the best we can with that to start. Turns out not as much corrosion as we thought, just a lot of dirt, which is a good thing. All right, so not only are we going to clean this inside lip here, we're going to clean around it. All right, so our new bearing and our parking brake assembly we have on the bench. We have to assemble these on the bench before we put it in the vehicle because of the way we decided to take this off. Before we assemble our bearing into the parking brake assembly, we're just going to take a very light coat of grease and apply it to this flange point here that's going to mount up to our parking brake assembly. The reason for doing this is hopefully to minimize any corrosion and moisture causing corrosion in the future. All right, now that we have that light coat of grease applied on our parking brake assembly, this is the top, this is the bottom. On our hub assembly, this electrical plug here is going to go at the bottom. So now we're going to take our hub assembly, put it into our parking brake assembly. And flip everything over. Now we can align our bolt holes a little bit better. We can push our parking brake assembly down to the hub. Now that we've done that, we can bring this assembly to the vehicle. All right, so now we can take our parking brake assembly and hub and slide it into position. And what we're actually going to do is take one bolt and thread it through. See if we can line it up and just get that one bolt threaded into the hub to start. That'll kind of hold things into position. So this one bolt is basically meant to just hold everything into position. We're not going to tighten it down, we're not going to snug it up. It's just there to locate everything and hold it while you continue to get the other three bolts in. So with that being said, we're going to put in the bottom bolt here on the same side. Now if you are somewhat misaligned with your bolt locations, You can spin your hub in the front to see how far off you are, and if you need to spin your hub at all, you can do that through the front. And the bottom one, I'm just going to put them into position. Okay, while looking through the front of the hub and moving the lugs or the studs around to see the 4 bolts coming into the back of the hub, once you've got them started, we're going to start to bring our hub in evenly, which is a little bit at a time, rotating all the way around in a crisscross pattern. The goal here is to bring that hub in flat. So that last bolt is now threaded almost all the way in. We'll go a little bit further and then we'll start crisscrossing our way around. All right, pretty good resistance there. Okay, down the bottom. All right, so now we have pretty good resistance all the way around on all 4 bolts. They look from the front like they're all through just about the same amount. So now what we'll do is we'll start our torquing sequence. All right, so now we're going to torque down these 4 bolts. I'm going to do it in a crisscross pattern. I'm going to torque them down to 45 foot-pounds. And now, just to be sure, we're going to run around a second time. Okay, so our speed sensor wire and our clip have to go onto our new hub. What we're going to do is reinstall our clip first. And now we're going to plug it in to our hub. Okay, just push straight down to make sure you're seated. Go ahead and give it a little tug up. All right, so we're going to reconnect our parking brake now. First thing we're going to do is take this part and put it through our bracket. To do that, we are going to put some backwards or forwards pressure on this area here and put our line or our collapsible rubber end through there, and then push it forward so this meets up with the bracket. So now what we have is the end which connects to our parking brake tab here. So we're going to use this slotted panel tool and we're going to push this hook forwards and align our parking brake cable to it. And just push it on the top. So now the last step we have to our parking brake cable is this retaining clip. Now, it's going to go on the rearward side of this bracket. But we're also going to need to make sure that this parking brake is seated all the way to the rear while we press this into place. And just push it straight down. Sometimes to do that, need a pair of pliers. And you're going to push it down till the top of the clip is below the bracket. So now what we're going to do is apply some anti-seize to the hub surface, but ours is an aerosol and we don't need to anti-seize parking brake pads. So we're going to cover up a side at a time. So before we install our new rotor, we're going to put it on backwards, and we're going to clean the surface that our pads are going to go to. Typically in shipping, they'll put greases or oils on this surface. We're going to clean it. We're also going to clean the inside where our shoes, our emergency brake shoes, are going to go. Just going to use some brake parts cleaner. Once we do the back side, we'll flip it around and do the front. Now, because we're done with the back and we're ready to do the front, we're actually going to take this off and align these two screw holes in the proper position, because now when we slide it on, it's going to stay on. Now at this point, to hold our rotor into position, we're going to put our two Phillips screws back in. Again, at this point, to tighten these down if you need to, you can put a breaker bar here to stop the rotor from spinning. We're just going to hold that rotor, tighten these up. Looks good. Now we have our adjustment wheel access hole here. Our adjustment wheel is at the top. So what we're going to do now is get a small flathead screwdriver and adjust that wheel, open or closed, until we hear a little bit of drag on our parking brake shoes. Once we hear that drag, we're going to back it off just a touch, and then we'll put our rubber cover from our old rotor in here. So now we have the rotor lined up with the parking brake adjustment wheel. So now what we're going to do is move that adjustment wheel either tighter or looser, depending on what we need. All right, so all we're doing now is adjusting this just past the point where we hear any friction. All right, so if you spin this, you can hear it lock up. We're getting just to the point where it doesn't lock up. All right, so now that we have our parking brake shoes adjusted, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall our cap. Now this rubber plug here, or cap, came from the old rotor. Just reinstall it into the new one. If you happen to put this in and it falls inside the rotor, take the time to remove it. You don't want that to get stuck in your parking brakes. All right, so once our cap's in and our parking brakes are adjusted, now we can start to add on our brakes. Now we can bring our caliper bracket to the vehicle and start to install our two bolts. So we're just going to thread these in by hand to start. right, now that we have these snugged up, we'll come back and torque them down. So now we're going to come back and torque our caliper bolts down to 70 foot-pounds. And now we can install our pads. All right, now we're going to get the back in and put our caliper onto the brake pads and our caliper bracket. And then we can start by hand our 2 bolts. At some point here, because we have new fresh grease and new boots in here, these pins that we had greased up may start to spin as we start to tighten these down. We'll deal with that when we get there. Just something to take note of. So now we're going to tighten up our caliper bolts. We're going to torque these down to 20 foot-pounds. And if in doing this, this back bolt here on our pins starts to rotate, we'll need to come in and back that up while we torque it, but it looks pretty good. Do the same thing on the top. Okay, so now we can install our wheel. Okay, so while the vehicle's in the air, we're just going to snug up these lug nuts, and then we'll drop it down and torque them. We're going to even do this in a crisscross pattern because we want this wheel to go on flat. So now that we're on the ground, the tire can't spin, we're going to torque down our lug nuts to 75 foot-pounds. We're going to do that in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.